When we think of Allied air superiority in World War II, one legendary aircraft often steals the spotlight: the P-51 Mustang. It's the Cadillac of the sky, the sleek, long-range fighter that supposedly single-handedly escorted bombers to Berlin and swept the Luftwaffe from the skies. But what if I told you that this popular narrative, while compelling, is a dramatic oversimplification? What if the Mustang wasn't the cause of Allied victory, but rather a beneficiary of a battle that was already being won? Today, we're going to dive deep into the numbers, the logistics, and the overlooked heroes of the air war to reveal the true story. It's a story of production, training, oil, and a multitude of aircraft working in concert. The real victory wasn't won by a silver bullet, but by a sledgehammer of industrial might and strategic brilliance. Let's rewind to late 1943, even before the P-51 arrived in significant numbers over Europe. The Luftwaffe was already in deep, deep trouble. A critical factor? Pilot training. An American fighter pilot entering combat had around 350 hours of flight time. His German counterpart? If he was lucky, he had 110. Why the massive gap? For one, Germany was hemorrhaging experienced veterans, particularly on the brutal Eastern Front. But more importantly, they were running out of fuel. You can't train pilots if you can't keep their planes in the air. This meant rookie German pilots were being sent into combat against highly trained Allied airmen. It was a recipe for disaster. In fact, a captured Luftwaffe colonel, when asked about the fearsome new Mustang, famously remarked that while it was an excellent plane, it was almost irrelevant. He explained that Allied fighters, by the time they reached his sector, often had only 20 minutes of fuel left for combat before needing to turn back. This comment highlights a crucial point. Before the Mustang's long-range capabilities became widespread, the Luftwaffe was already struggling to even meet the threat, let alone defeat it. So if it wasn't just the Mustang, who were the other key players? Let's talk about the real workhorse of the strategic bombing campaign, the B-24 Liberator. The B-17 Flying Fortress gets all the glory, but the Liberator was produced in greater numbers, over 18,000 of them. It could fly farther, carry a heavier bomb load, and was cheaper to build. It was the B-24, more than any other aircraft, that systematically dismantled Germany's synthetic oil production facilities, which we'll see was the true nail in the Luftwaffe's coffin. And what about the fighter escort? Before the Mustang took over, two other rugged, powerful aircraft were clearing the path: the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-38 Lightning. During a pivotal operation in February 1944 known as Big Week, these fighters didn't just protect bombers. They went on the offensive, strafing German airfields with devastating effect. In just 1 week, P-47s and P-38s destroyed more Luftwaffe aircraft on the ground than Mustangs would shoot down in the air over the next 6 months combined. Let that sink in. They were destroying the enemy's air force before it could even take off. The P-47 Thunderbolt, in particular, was a beast built for ground attack. Pilots called it the Jug for its sheer toughness. While Mustangs were dueling high above, Thunderbolts were down in the weeds, wreaking havoc on German logistics. They specialized in destroying everything that kept the German war machine running: bridges, supply depots, and especially trains. Over the course of the war, the Thunderbolts destroyed tens of thousands of locomotives, rail cars, and trucks. An army can't fight if it can't get supplies, and the P-47 was a master at cutting those supply lines. The attrition rate for the Luftwaffe was becoming unsustainable, and not just from combat. From January to June 1944, the very period the Mustang was making its name, the Luftwaffe lost more aircraft to non-combat causes than to Allied fighters and flak combined. We're talking about training accidents, mechanical failures, and planes that simply couldn't fly because they had no fuel. Germany's war economy was cracking under the immense pressure of a multi-front war and relentless bombing. And we cannot ignore the gargantuan conflict on the Eastern Front. While the U.S. Army Air Forces claimed around 8,000 Luftwaffe aircraft destroyed in the West, Soviet fighters accounted for a staggering 13,000. For years, the bulk of Germany's fighter force, the Jagdwaffe, was tied down fighting a desperate war of attrition against the Soviet Air Force. This relentless pressure in the East meant that Germany could never fully concentrate its air power against the Allied bomber streams in the West. The war in the air was being fought and won on two fronts. This brings us back to the pilots. The decline in the number and quality of German pilots was already a steep, irreversible trend long before the P-51 became the dominant fighter over Europe. By the time the Mustang arrived in force, It was entering a sky where the opposition was already depleted, undertrained, and running on fumes. The P-51 didn't so much create air superiority as it inherited and then ruthlessly exploited it. It was the final decisive blow in a fight that was already swinging heavily in the Allies' favor. The ultimate cause of the Luftwaffe's demise can be traced back to a single critical resource: oil. The strategic oil campaign, primarily executed by B-24s and their escorts, was brutally effective. By targeting Germany's synthetic fuel plants, the Allies choked the life out of the entire German military. In May of 1944, a massive raid crippled fuel production. By September, Germany's aviation fuel output had plummeted to just 5% of what it had been before the campaign began. No fuel meant no training flights, no defensive patrols, and no ability to counter the Allied invasion. The most advanced jet fighter in the world, the Me-262, was often left sitting on the tarmac, a useless marvel of engineering without the fuel to fly. And finally, let's talk about the sheer overwhelming power of American industry. In 1944 alone, the United States produced an astonishing 47,000 fighter aircraft. To put that in perspective, that's more fighters in a single year than Germany produced during the entire war. This wasn't a fair fight. It was a mathematical certainty. Germany was being buried under an avalanche of steel, aluminum, and manpower. The Allies could afford to lose aircraft and pilots at a rate that would have been catastrophic for the Axis, and simply replace them. So the victory in the air was not the story of one wonder weapon. The P-51 Mustang was a phenomenal aircraft, a war winner in its own right that sealed the deal. But its success was built on a foundation laid by others. It was a victory of logistics and production. It was a victory for the B-24 Liberator that starved the enemy of fuel. It was a victory for the P-47 Thunderbolt that shredded German supply lines. It was a victory for the P-38 Lightning that helped clear the skies in the crucial early stages. It was a victory for the thousands of Soviet pilots who bled the Luftwaffe dry on the Eastern Front. And it was a victory for the planners who understood that wars are won not just by brilliant dogfights, but by spreadsheets, production lines, and targeting the enemy's economic heart. The real story is bigger, more complex, and far more impressive. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this breakdown interesting, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more deep dives into military history. Let me know in the comments which overlooked aircraft or battle you'd like to see covered next. See you in the next one.